Today we're traveling to Cambridge, UK to meet with Hermione Crease from Purr Metrix. And I'm lucky enough to know Hermione all the way back from Business of Software, which was helping put together one of the best conferences you can attend. But today we're going to talk about saving people during the heat, because we're in the middle of the heat wave in the south of France. I don't know if it's the same case in Germany, in the UK. I'm ready to go on vacation.
Really are. No,
Exactly.
it's so where you are than it is where I am, which is a steady 18 degrees and horribly humid.
All right. So why don't we start by talking about a little bit about what you do at Purr Metrix, and then we'll chat about a bunch of different things.
Sure. Okay. So Purr Metrix is a startup based in Cambridge in the UK, where, as I say, I wish it was as sunny as it seems to be in the south of France. But what we are doing is we're an Internet of Things business that is providing a simple and retrofittable tool for commercial buildings that allows people who are managing the buildings to heat map what's happening in their spaces. I get myself in trouble when I say heat map because people say, "Hey, what are you heat mapping?" And I go, heat. But the fact is that heating and cooling are about 40% of the energy footprint of a typical office. More or less in other types of facility, depending on what use they're putting it to. But it's a big energy drain in the UK and further afield. So managing it carefully is an important part of sustainability, and it's also really important for people's comfort and, in fact, their productivity, which all sounds like a perfectly sensible thing to do, but it turns out that managing it carefully is actually really tricky. And it's particularly tricky because the most offices are run using sort of HVAC systems that have maybe thermostats or data reported from sensors that may not necessarily be in the same place as the people who are experiencing the conditions. It may not be tremendously accurate because the systems are old. And even if it is up to date, the people who are using these systems pretty much have to be qualified engineers at a reasonably high level to understand what the hell these systems are talking about, because they are really complex and really not user-friendly. So we thought it would be helpful for professional facilities managers and for facilities managers who are perhaps slightly more fallen into the role, to have a tool that they could put in and immediately see the patterns of how things are heating and cooling in their office and make adjustments to their system based on all the data, on real data that really reflects what's happening. And technically, this is what we've got. So this little beauty
All right,
is...
so that's that small that you guys are making it. Cool.
This is a kitten, by the way. It's not a sensor, it's a kitten.
Hence the Purr sensor.
You can put, a dozen of these in say a 60-person office, and they will give you localized temperature data, which we can take to a web application and provide a heat map on the web application. And then on top of that data, we can start to build the really interesting, sexy stuff, like alerts that show you how quickly areas are cooling or heating, and relate that to your specific parts of your heating or cooling equipment. Like, for example, alerts that give you or reports that give you an idea of how good your building's fabric is, how quickly it's losing heat, and like reports that allow you to understand if occupied areas or unoccupied areas are being heated unnecessarily. So we've got a lot of analytics work and a lot of, I suppose, algorithm developments do based on the data that we've got. But right now I'm in that fun zone where I'm going around talking to a lot of users saying, well, here's the data. We could do an enormous amount with this data, but actually, what's your wish list? Tell me what are the things that should be on that dashboard.
All right, well, let's even backtrack a minute, because now you're in a company, that fun time of trying to grow the company, understanding from the users. Obviously, from Business of Software, you saw a lot of crazy people like us who took the jump. What really got you to take that jump and get into doing this?
Oh yes, well this is fun because it's kind of a hardware and a software product, right? So the Internet of Things is a for me it's a lovely field, because I spent 10 or 15 years in more or less in hardware, in energy efficiency products and smart metering, smart grid. It doesn't get much more hardware than the electricity grid, let me tell you. And the ability to add software on top of that and to start to provide tools that are accessible, that made it really exciting. But going back further than that, when I left university 40 years ago, I qualified as a chartered surveyor. So I worked. We didn't know this about me, did you? I am a
I did not. You see, you think you know people, and then the truth comes out.
No, the truth is out now. I qualified as a chartered surveyor, so I know that the large developers, the large pension funds can take 20, 30, 40% out of their estates in terms of the energy that they're using, simply by paying attention to what their building management systems are telling them and by being clever about how they manage their buildings. But that's not happening for the 90% of commercial buildings that aren't under the management of these guys, which is an enormous opportunity to do something about decarbonising the UK's and indeed internationally decarbonising commercial footprints. So from that perspective, I find that very exciting because I got a bit frustrated about the lack of tools to help people in that thing. And also, I just, I like the idea of being able to help people be more comfortable in their office space and be more productive in their office space. So what's not to like, right?
That's right. It's not like, though. Now I have to ask you the part that some people are probably thinking about. If you, I spent 20 years in the U.S. and literally the coldest time I ever was in the U.S. was during the summer, because everybody runs their AC. So, you're better off wearing a ski suit at work rather than anything else.
They're hugely overcooled. And I discovered something quite interesting about this the other day. Do you know why that is? It's not because people in the US typically have lower internal thermostats than us, soft Europeans. It's a prestige thing. Culturally, in US business, and I'm sure this is a sweeping generalization and it doesn't apply to quite a lot of people, but particularly for large US professional services and financial services companies, cold buildings are seen as high-class buildings.
Right.
And that's actually leaked over somewhat to the financial centre in London as well. So I've been having some conversations about that. So cool buildings are seen as high class, which is ironic, really, because when you consider in the financial services sector, there is a potentially high output per desk for individuals working in that sector. And it turns out that the impact on productivity of an overcooled space is a great deal higher than the impact on productivity of too warm a space.
All right.
So
building on this, you and I have kids, and we know pretty much the tricks to get them to do things they don't want to do by pretending it's cool, it's nice, or at least we pretend to be cool parents.
I haven't tried that with my kids.
But with financial investors, they're way smarter than we are. So technology can only take people so far into reporting the data. Have you already thought of some tricks you can use to encourage people to not crank that AC all the way up? Because even though they're going to know they're spending so much, since there's prestige involved, how do you manage that?
Well, actually, I think that is likely to sort itself out as what seems to be happening in the market in the very high-end space is that at the moment you have a buying group that has a perception that cold is high class, but there is quite a lot of informal experimentation being done from people in, say, the human resource side of things about the actual impact of temperatures and comfort on productivity. And it's no coincidence that in the big trading floors, they are one of the very few areas in any commercial building I've ever come across where you actually have microclimates set up around each desk, so that people have the opportunity to set the climate exactly as they like it and in a way that's not distracting. Now, that is setting a trend that I think will gradually trickle down to areas of those businesses that are perhaps less high value per seat. Um, and as they get the message that actually temperature has an important role to play in terms of helping people concentrate on the task in hand, I think once those larger adopters of space and those larger adopters of high value space get that message, gradually, and I'm talking years, not months, this will start to trickle into other space users as well.
Okay, that's pretty neat. So, switching topic for a bit, a lot of the trend nowadays is to give everything for free or in a freemium model. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you and I are in the B2B business, so we can look at things a bit differently. But someone asked me an interesting question. I wanted your take on it. Do you think it's going to get to the point where some companies are going to be offering the device and the information for free, and then in return we're going to get bombarded by ads on different topics that are related? So in your case, people are going to get sensors for free, and then in return they're going to be receiving ads on their computer about new and more efficient cooling systems or techniques to improve their energy footprint.
I think it would be very difficult to do with a hardware.
I hope so.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I really do. So I'm not going to talk too much about pricing on these, but these are designed to be affordable for an in-house facility kind of budget, right? Which means equipping a medium-sized office for a few £100.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're low cost, but I'm not, in the foreseeable future, I'm not going to have sufficient runway to cut from anything except hardware sales to cover the necessary time period in which ads would need to ramp up, right? So
Sure.
I only think that may be a model that slightly more mature companies that want to pivot might have a look at.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
That's right.
I won't call it last chance saloon. I'll just call it unlikely for us.
That makes sense. Plus, getting customers to pay for things is not a bad idea either. So,
What I would say is that I think there is much more potential for, we are a monitoring tool.
yeah.
We are very interested in building a community that shares the learning from that monitoring tool and shares thoughts about next steps and the workflows that might be built around that monitoring tool. And that's a community that will inevitably be interested in taking steps that involve things like more energy efficient products, potentially things like blinds, thermostats. There's an enormous number of things that you can do with your space. Now, whether we would want to partner up with companies providing that sort of equipment, I'm not at all sure. I think there's value to it as a monitoring tool to being seen to be independent. But certainly I'd like the community, as it develops, to start to bring forward its experience of working with the next steps along in the workflow, the solutions.
And since you're in startup mode, so when you had this idea and you created the product, the cat that you have at the moment. Sorry. But something that's very interesting that I think a lot of people oftentimes come up with ideas, especially in the IoT field right now, which is booming. How difficult was it for you to source the technology, the hardware, and the product?
That's not the issue.
Okay.
So
That's good.
no, it is. Let's backtrack a little. From the hardware point of view, you have to bear in mind that the other guys in my team, this is bread and butter. So our CEO, Ed Colby, is a guy with 15, 20 years of hardware development experience under his belt, including big manufacturing runs in Eastern Europe, Mexico, usual places. So he's got a very good understanding of supply chain and what it takes to get hardware product into the market. Now, the thing that is actually more interesting is the development of the software piece. There are I think fewer traps in what you might call the downstream manufacturing end, but the sort of continual cycles of product development and managing that and getting the skill sets on board in a very competitive environment. That's less our home turf, and an area that we are building the team in.
Cool. So at some point, I'm gonna guess you're gonna have to talk to investors, unless you're gonna be self-funded all the way. Who knows?
Well, trying to put off that point as long as possible.
That's right. There's I think IoT is one of the big buzzwords that you can put in presentation nowadays for people to be interested, especially being in Cambridge. Do you see, when you look at different products out there, do you see how many are really interesting products are being built within the IoT field that could catch the eye of investors, or as opposed to just, oh, we're going to build something cool and hope it works some days?
Well, if I was an investor, I think at the moment I would be holding my ground against necessarily investing in many more platforms, unless, and I think this is old news actually, that market is consolidating now, unless it's a platform with a very specific and particular USP. And actually, I've seen an awful lot fewer vertical propositions, and we actually have a vertical proposition here from hardware through to software, which I think is tricky because it is potentially quite difficult for investors to weigh up the different benefits if they haven't got a good population of opportunities to look at. Would I be looking at any specific sectors? Yes, I actually would be looking at the commercial property sector, but I would say that.
Never would have guessed that one. Makes sense.
And I think e-health is obviously another one, although in the UK that has a very specific set of challenges around knitting it into the National Health Service, because the procurement.
Well, another challenge. You mentioned health, but maybe in a sense, in what you're doing, you're getting into question as well. Do you have, as you're working with bigger companies right now for your pilots, how concerned are they about security and knowing where the data is going to be? Do they consider this kind of data competitive data? Because in a sense, if you have my footprint, if I know your footprint, I know how much energy you're using, I can derive some interesting information about business.
Well, more than that, we have floor plans showing people's offices. And I have been talking to other businesses that have this sort of issue, and 10 or 15 years ago, it was never an issue for somebody to hand over a floor plan and to put it into a database somewhere. It's now considered, in some cases, particularly for large, high-value companies, it's considered a security issue, definitely, in a very real, let's not tell the terrorists where our MD sits sort of way. So people are perhaps a little less concerned specifically about the temperature data, but they sure as hell are concerned about people knowing exactly what the inside of their office looks like. I mean, sad but true. I think the terrorist attack on Charlie Hebdo had, a significant impact on bringing it home to people that, it's inside information like that has value.
So do you think it's going to get down the road again, maybe more of a hybrid model than a pure SaaS model, where some of the data stays within a company's realm, while the less important data goes outside for analysis? Or are you going to be building things so well secured that even the NSA is not going to come and see what you have?
I think, let's just think about it. I think there are ways of anonymizing what's happening within the office such that you can desensitize it somewhat. Not putting names on people's offices is a good start. So there are simple low-tech ways you can do this. I don't know that the hybrid model really, we've not been asked about it.
Okay.
I would instinctively be a little bit wary about it because I suspect it creates ripples and wrinkles in rolling out new features,
Okay.
which would make us unable to offer some, the service that we want to offer.
Well, since we're talking about dealing about those pesky people that on a regular basis, and we're talking about selling and marketing to them at the moment, you're selling a product, but like any IoT product, there's a big part of innovation that goes into it. How much education do you find yourself having to do when talking to prospective buyers, as opposed to just here's the product, are you interested in it?
Yeah, yeah. Oh well, it's really interesting as to how you start conversations. It's always really interesting because there are, particularly with the market that I'm working with, which has at one degree people who are engineers and who are very happy for us to start with the technology,
Mm-hmm.
and relate it to their business process. And then at the other end, you have people who may come quite often more from a software human resources side of things. So I tend to have, when it comes to education, I tend to start the looking at people's particular business process and people's particular situation. So are you running a help desk? How many calls does your help desk get that are hot cold? How often do people have to get up, walk over to whatever building it is with a thermometer and check whether that occupier is genuinely too hot or too cold, i.e. is a system failure, or whether it's part of people's comfort levels. So as an aside, I'm going slightly off topic, a very common conversation I have is people going, but of course people always feel too hot or too cold in an office. It's an individual thing about, people have different experiences of temperature. And this is true. However, what people don't appreciate is that when you design the heating or the cooling system in an office building, you use a fairly carefully worked out model. And the model works on the assumption that you need to satisfy 80% of the people in that space. There are reasonably well parameterized models of the distribution of comfort level across a population. So yes, you are always, sorry, not always, you are typically likely to see 20% of people in an office who will need either a fan or a jumper. That's understood. But you don't know whether you're dealing with one of that 20% or whether you're dealing with a system failure when they ring up. So that's a popular bugbear. And in terms of education, it really varies, and I never know until I get into a conversation. And I always like the ones where we sort of start educating and talking to people about both what the opportunity is and the fact that now you can do something about it. This is a tool that helps you reach that opportunity.
And that's pretty true that for most IoT products, there's going to be that big education part, regardless of the field you're in at first. It's so new, people are going to have to catch up to it.
I think that's one of the reasons why things like commercial property are actually more interesting, because I can pick up the phone to somebody and say, hi, have you had an incident in the past 12 months where somebody's been too hot or too cold in your office or your hospital, and have them go, yeah. And whilst we may not have a solution for that, that is a very quick way of framing the conversation. That means I can then move on to things like, well, okay, it's 40% potentially of your budget. Have you ever actually even looked at what you're doing with it, you're managing it more closely? And quite often the answer you get then is, well, we look at metering data, and we tend to look at it, at least a month in arrears, and it's only the data about what goes into the system. So you have no idea what actually you're getting out for the money that you spent on the energy on the meter, basically. So that people then start to get a bit thoughtful about okay, is my money in heating and cooling well invested money, and how would I know? Well, we have something that can help people understand a lot more about whether their money is well invested.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and not just because the wind is picking up, and I have
It
taken
is.
most of
It's
the time.
it's scale down there.
I know it's like gale force wind. I'm going to get blown
Your,
up. But one of the things that we're trying to do is also kind of do a paid forward or recommendation part of things. And you and I talked about this. Who should I talk to next about fun things, like fun ways to use technology to make it easier for us to live our daily lives?
Love this idea. So I was saying, and I still think this is a good idea, that you should talk to a bunch of guys called Product Health.
No pressure on you guys when you watch this and had no idea Hermione was going to say that.
Lucky. Who are based down in London, and who are doing some really interesting work. Again, it's in the energy field. I make no apologies for that. But much more in the developing world. And I won't tell you any more than that because it will spoil the surprise.
All right. Well, hopefully they'll be happy to jump in, and we can talk to them soon. All right. Well, for today, thank you very much, Hermione. We'll have all the info about the site and the company on the different links, so people can go to it, and I'm sure they can find out a lot more info and how they can be a lot more energy efficient. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.